Hello my quilting friends, my name is Leah Day and today I am stitching dripping paint. So this is an edge to edge design. I'm just going to stitch a wiggly line coming down, stitching a kind of a bulbous shape for that dripping paint shape. And then I just stitch a little wiggly line and repeat that. You can make that as random or as kind of formal as you want. It's entirely up to you. So I think that you could stitch just this on a quilt and that would look kind of cool, but of course I like to stitch it up a notch. So I'm going to travel stitch up and now I'm going to echo inside that line. So echoing is stitching a set distance away from another line of stitching. In this case, I'm aiming for about 1/8 of an inch from my first line of stitching. And what this does is it just adds emphasis. It fills in the space. We're flattening out that upper area of my little quilt sandwich. And we're going to just fill this in with texture. So this is technically a foundational design. We set the foundation by stitching that first wiggly dripping paint line. And then everything after that is just a process of filling it in with more and more echoes. Now I stitch back across and now we have kind of a decision to make whether we want to come down to a point or we want to just have a little curve and come over, leaving this area, that space open. We also have a decision within here. If you stitch a line down the center, it's going to close up the space and you're probably going to end up with a travel stitch line. It's up to you whether you like the open look or you want it to close up a little bit. I think it's going to look best if I leave it open. That's just my opinion, trying it out this one time. And this is one of those things that's worth stitching it out a few different ways. Use up some little squares just to see what you like and start developing your opinion about these quilting designs. These textures are exactly that, textures. There's no right or wrong way to stitch them. It's just a fun way to explore and really start just kind of developing that kind of artistic eye with your quilting designs. So now you can see I have really stitched beyond the area of the dripping paint, and this is just simple echo quilting. A similar design, if you want to just practice this, would be undulation, and we can get really interesting. We can start kind of widening our echo in certain places, like right here. I widen that out, and then we can get a little closer in other places, and then we can emphasize that with each extra line that we stitch. So here I'm going to widen that out even more. I'm going to bring in my line a little closer right there. And this is all about control over your machine, over your speed, over your hand movement when we are on a stationary machine like this. And it's totally up to you if you want that nice undulation effect at the top or if you want to maintain those evenly spaced echoes. Entirely up to you. So now that we have a little bit of practice stitching this on our home sewing machine, let's move to a long arm, stitch this on a real quilt. So I'm here on my Quilting 21X Elite long arm, and I am carefully stitching my dripping paint along the edge of this quilt block. This is one of our quilt blocks from the Friendship Quilt Along. Had this one left over, and I figured this will be a great opportunity to play with different designs, stitch it out, just see what different textures look like over this block. So I'm just carefully bringing this up, stitching it randomly without really trying to fill this in too densely. You really want the dripping paint to be nice and open. That way you have this space for the echoes. So I'm going to bring this right up to the edge, and then now we're going to stitch those echoes. Remember, this is very much like undulation. It's okay if the echoes vary. They can get a little closer, they can get a little further away. So I'm just going to allow this to be imperfectly perfect. I like that. Careful not to overlap my stitching. Keep in mind, it is perfectly fine for you to cross over your lines of stitching. It's just whenever you're stitching a design where you're not aiming for that. I'm really wanting my lines to be parallel, a little wider, a little bit narrower, and I broke thread. So I had to take a minute there to pick all those stitching at my thread shredded and had to get back on track. So whenever that happens, I just pick back, tie off, and bury my thread, and then I pull up thread pretty much in that same spot. Take 3 stitches not in place, but moving my machine ever so slightly over, and you can see you really cannot tell where I started and stopped. I will tie off and bury those thread tails just the exact same way. So yeah, we're just aiming to have nice parallel stitching. And again, it's okay if your lines cross. There's no rule against it. It's just with a design like this, we kind of don't want our lines to cross. We want them to be running parallel. So sometimes I'm getting a little close. You can see here I'm going to widen out and get a little further away. This is definitely going to be a design that you can use to take up lots of space, to quilt through borders or sashing really quickly. I definitely think it would fill in background area really nicely, really fast. So yeah, looking pretty good. I kind of like it on the edge of this block. I think that adds a really interesting texture to a pretty plain background. And here's what it looked like whenever I finished quilting dripping paint.